on Pop Culture Class in the 1960s. Here's your decade overview. A very interesting time in U.S. history and one of my personal favorites to talk about. So here are your interesting facts of the decade. Hey, look, everything's on the up and up and looking good. The only thing not on the up and up, which is a plus, is unemployment. So things still improving for the everyday American in the 1960s. What's going on? A ton. Let's get started with a general feeling of the decade, and that the 1960s is going to begin full of promise, but kind of end in confusion, anger, and despair for most Americans. So you have that prosperity and nostalgia and happiness of the 50s kind of being in the beginning, and then the end with the Vietnam War and political strife kind of meaning like a very turbulent time. And so let's start first with the beginning of the decade and the Camelot era. The Camelot era is just a term used to refer to John F. Kennedy's administration. And so you saw JFK and First Lady Jackie Kennedy on the title slide of the video. Good looking, young, full of great ideas. JFK's administration kind of had more of a celebrity status than any presidency it ever had before. And so, like the magical times of King Arthur in Camelot, many people referred to his presidency as the Camelot era. And so he had a lot of really interesting ideas, a war on poverty, civil rights movements. And so although not a whole lot actually gets accomplished as a result of his presidency being cut short, his confidence was contagious. And so lots of people were huge JFK fans. An example of the Camelot era coming to the rescue of the American people is the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so to give you some background here, in 1962, a U.S. spy plane actually took pictures of Cuba and detected some Soviet missiles in Cuba. The Soviets' rationale, hey, we've got to protect our communist brothers here against potential attack from the United States. But obviously America was not a fan of our enemy having missiles so close to home. And so JFK actually sent the Navy to blockade Cuba, and there was a period of very high tension where people thought, here we go, the Cold War is about to become hot, and we're about to enter another war with the Soviet Union. But JFK actually managed to strike negotiation with Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. And so the agreement was we would never invade Cuba and try to make them non-communist. We would remove missiles from Turkey, which was, a neighboring country to the Soviet Union, and to decrease the threat that they were experiencing. And in return, the Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba. And so JFK was hailed as, like negotiating and saving us from actually entering a potential war. One of the not so good things about the 1960s are the amount of assassinations of important leaders that occurred during this decade. The first, obviously, being JFK himself, who, as you remember, in November of 1963 was assassinated while driving in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. The picture there at the top left is actually showing police walking Lee Harvey Oswald, who had been arrested as a suspect in the assassination, and being caught on film here being assassinated by Jack Ruby. So assassination of the assassin. And so a very confusing and turbulent time for Americans. We follow that up at the end of the decade with Martin Luther King Jr., who is pictured there to the right of Lee Harvey Oswald, the great civil rights leader being assassinated in Tennessee in April of 1968, and then not pictured but still important, Robert Kennedy, little brother to JFK, Democratic presidential candidate. He's assassinated in June of 1968 in California after a campaign speech for the California primaries. And so lots of uneasiness and unsettled feelings in the United States as a result of all these assassinations. If you ask any family member or teacher that was alive in the 60s to remember those things, I guarantee you they'll give you some pretty specific details about where they were and how they heard about those three assassinations of those great leaders. When you think 60s, you probably also think Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is a kind of confusing one to talk about in that it doesn't really have set parameters like some of the other wars we've discussed. Like World War II, I can tell you, hey, Pearl Harbor in 41 got us involved. The Korean War, 1950, North Korea invades South Korea and we step in. But Vietnam's a lot trickier. Vietnam issues actually go back way before the 60s, and so even as early as the 1950s, we being the United States, was providing military aid to France, who was involved in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, trying to regain control of their colonies against communist rebels that were attempting to take control. And so we were kind of involved as far back as the 1950s. So President Eisenhower provided that kind of aid. When Kennedy becomes president in the beginning of the 1960s, he actually steps it up a little and provides CIA going to Vietnam, lots more money, Green Beret, special forces going in and training the South Vietnamese how to, run this counterinsurgency against the communist North Vietnamese that were trying to, at the time, regain control of the entire country. And so we were somewhat involved for quite some time. I guess the official beginning of the Vietnam War for Americans, though, probably comes after JFK is assassinated and Vice President Lyndon Johnson becomes president and really steps up the effort. In 1964, he goes to Congress requesting the ability to send troops to Vietnam. And so 1964 and 1965 is usually when most history books will tell you the Vietnam War starts from an American perspective. And so LBJ sends 3,500 Marines, starts regular bombings of North Vietnam, and our involvement is now in full swing. Initially, people kind of brushed it off because it wasn't really affecting them in their everyday lives. But as we get further into the decade and more young men are being drafted into the war, you start to see more everyday Americans getting involved with an understanding of Vietnam. Campus radicals were a great example of that. You have, as the 60s progress, increasing involvement on college campuses of students protesting the war, being anti-draft, anti-conscription, right, anti-war, some of those becoming relatively violent, as we will discuss in our 70s video. The civil rights movement that we talked about in the 1950s is going to continue with the efforts of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Remember, his policy was one of civil disobedience, non-violent, peaceful protests, things like marches and sit-ins. You might remember from history class examples of some of those. Not just the bus boycott of the 50s with Rosa Parks, but lots of different marches and rallies happening as a result of his organization. Some of the things that kind of shift in the 60s, though, away from his original intent. Even before he was assassinated, he had some discrepancies in the civil rights movements with other leaders. An example of that being the Black Power movement, which was initially more of a cultural and pride and heritage of African Americans, but then becomes more of a more radical and extreme view of civil rights. And so the bottom right-hand picture there, that is Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who were the founders of the Black Panther Party, they actually followed the beliefs of Malcolm X, who is pictured there on the left-hand side under Lee Harvey Oswald. So Malcolm X was a bit different than Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in that he said, hey, equality by any means necessary. And so you'll see the Black Panther Party picture. We have guns involved in the civil rights movement. And so that becomes more of a turbulent view of civil rights than we'd had in earlier times. When you stop in the room next time, take a look at the poster that is hanging up on the wall of the two track and field Olympians with their fists in the air. That's a great example of the Black Power movement. Those two individuals there were winning a gold and a bronze medal at the 1968 Summer Olympics. The gold medalist on the higher podium is Tommie Smith, and John Carlos is winning the bronze, both American, both huge advocates of civil rights and human rights, and actually decided to, as a form of political protest, give their Black Power salute, that fist raised in the air, as they were receiving medals and as they were playing the American national anthem during the medal ceremony. And so, as a result of that political protest, both gentlemen were ejected from the games. The U.S. Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, actually put a lifetime ban on the two of them as a result of getting politics involved in sports. But their argument was, hey, politics are involved in sports from day one, and we want the discrimination against minorities in sports to end as well. And so they didn't seem to regret their decision, in that the Black Power movement actually got some TV time, international TV time, as a result of their silent but very powerful protest. So check that out the next time you're in the classroom. And then the last thing to mention here concerning the civil rights movement is women's liberation, which will become actually much larger in the 70s and 80s, but starts in the 60s. If you remember from our 1940s video, we had women working in the factories and on the farms as the men were all fighting in Europe and in Asia. And when the World War II vets returned home, the majority of those women were laid off from those positions in the factories. And this whole, okay, you can return to being a housewife now, during the 1950s, didn't leave some women very happy at have experienced that kind of equality and then to have it taken away. And so in the 60s, as part of your civil rights movement, you see things like the National Organization for Women, or NOW, forming and protesting for things like equal pay and an end to discrimination in the workplace. So lots of huge political changes happening in the 1960s, but that's your overview. So thanks for listening.